Hey everyone, Dan here. We are going to take a look at Proterra Inc. today. Before we get into it, if you enjoy these videos, please hit the like and subscribe button. It helps a lot. And also feel free to comment below with your thoughts, opinions, ideas, tickers you'd like me to cover. This ticker was suggested by a commenter when it was, I believe, ACTC. I'm just getting to it now, but I do log all of those requests and I get to them as soon as I can, and I definitely appreciate it. Okay, so PTRA. I thought we'd do a couple of things. One, we'll obviously take a look at where Proterra sits today in terms of its, possible downside bounce zones or dip buy areas, and then upside price targets and things like that. We'll take a look at the indicators. I thought we'd also look at sort of like how its SPAC lifestyle or life cycle played out, because a lot of these SPACs tend to follow a formula or a variation of a couple of different formulas. So it's worth sort of noting on this one some key catalysts and timeframes from when ACTC became PTRA and how those different sort of catalysts played a role in the price and the run-ups and the rundowns and things like that. So starting back here at the beginning, SPACs come out typically around like $10. I know like PSTH, Bill Ackman's, I think was at a $20 initial offering or something like that, but they're often around $10 at their initial offering. And then, they typically go through a bit of a run up as like folks are trying to figure out, like how much do we trust the management to the SPAC and things like that. And then here you see some big changes. So this is a big component often of SPACs is just wild fluctuations on the most important catalysts, I guess we would say. So here we have on January 12th, a press release. I noted that here just so I knew what I was looking at in different time frames. And if we look here on the news cycle, I think this needs a refresh. Yep. Okay, so we look here in the news cycle on the 12th. What happened? PR Newswire, Proterra, commercial electric vehicle technology leader, to become publicly listed through transaction with ArcLight Clean Transition Corp, which is, I think, this puppy here, ACTC. Yep. And so as ArcLight and Proterra announced that, like, hey, we're in talks, we're planning to do this thing, that's when we had this run up from essentially what's here about 12 and a half, and it stalled out a little bit at 25. So it stalled out a little bit after doubling, but really just kind of like bull flagged and then shot up to 31. So about 2.5 times the price at which the press release went out was the run up that you saw. And that happened all by January 19th. So over the course of one calendar week. Then, some sort of like retracement. You see obviously like this area here where it had retraced back to after the initial run up, which was coming down just below like 22. It came down and sort of like continuously kept treating that as support. So again, I'm sort of pointing these things out as things that you can look for in future SPACs as ways that they sort of like act and react to different news, and then what they do once that news cycle is passed. So that's always the interesting thing. Huge catalysts driving up a major price fluctuation. But then what happens? The hype dies down, volume goes out, folks take profits. A bunch of other folks try to figure out like, okay, so now that we aren't in the teens or the single digits anymore, now that we're not hovering around $10 essentially, what's the right price for this stock if it is Proterra? Like, what are the fundamentals of the company? What are their what's their potential for growth in the future? Like, how much of a key player are they going to be in the EV market? That sort of thing. And so then the market as a whole comes around and tries to like say, okay, what's a like potential best price for this stock to be at based on the company that is the target for the SPAC merger. So then that plays out over a lengthy period of time. If we're keeping an eye on that like $22 zone, you see it starts to fall through. Again, I think I guess stuff may have happened here in the news cycle. Nothing stood out to me, but that doesn't mean anything. But oftentimes this is just due to kind of jitters as like things get close to the vote in order to approve the merger. And if there's oftentimes some sort of like weird news comes out about a company when they're getting ready to go public, just because they're going from like startup or venture backed company to publicly traded company, and there's a lot of things that happen within private companies and startups that aren't necessarily seen as great by the publicly traded community. So some weirdness and some unexpected things can come out and sort of like fluctuate the price quite a bit. So then it dips down, and this was also in the time frame, remember, like February, March, when a bunch of growth stocks started to get really beat up, and then SPACs also started to take a beating quite significantly. It's sort of like the stink of a SPAC kind of became a thing in the marketplace. And so you see it ended up coming down here and sort of like creating a bit of a floor for itself around 14.15 as it bounced around a bit there, and then tested and retested that area a bunch of times. And then finally, several months later, when all of the good news and the hype and everything from the initial run-up had died down, they set June 11th as the meeting date, and that would have been the meeting date for the vote to approve or not approve ACTC merging with PTRA, or at that time there was no ticker, merging with Proterra. But let's just double check that. So on May 14th, the news cycle was what? PR Newswire. ArcLight Clean Transition Corporation announces registration statement in connection with its proposed business combination with Proterra has been declared effective and sets June 11, 2021. I think this says something like as the date for the vote. I don't want to open it up because I don't want to flip over to a browser, but this announcement of like, hey, we have a date in mind, right? That's the next big thing. So it's like, who's the target going to be? That's the first big question. Okay, we have a target. Okay, let's try to like price that company in the market. And then even if it does kind of price that company, it often falls below that price because there's such a lengthy waiting period, and there's just sort of like this really gray zone of what's the timeline here? When is this going to happen? And so anything that helps to go ahead and confirm timelines or put dates on things goes a long way in terms of like, what the investors are looking for, both from a news cycle, like driving interest perspective. I don't necessarily want to say hype again, but it's just sort of like a clarity and like oh, right, this company is coming on board. And so anything that accomplishes that tends to go a long way. So setting June 11th, as the dates, it gave folks about a month to digest that and kind of get prepared. I'll talk about why this fib retracement is here in a minute, but just ignore it for now. But anyway, we saw after that came out, it was at about $14. We saw a run up to about 20. And then here's where things get really interesting. We get the approval, and these things then happen very quickly. Like the approval and then the ticker change is just like boom, boom. So there's like, here's our target. And then there's like this extensive waiting period when the price will often run up. I think you saw this also with CCIV and Lucid Motors, right? Runs up incredibly high, and then plummets down back to earth essentially when time just drags on, and folks are like, wait, why is my money wrapped up in this again? This is like months away if it's even going to happen. Oh, and hey, what's the deal with that company again? Are they actually going to produce anything? Like, what stage are they in their own like company life cycle? And so that a lot of questions start to prop up, and then you announce this like date to votes, which is a much more confined period of time. They announced it about a month before the votes, and then once that approval happens, then it's like bang bang. Just a few days later, the ticker symbol changes and it's like full swing. So it's a weird sort of like stretching and condensing of time frames, given the various different like purposes of the announcements. But that's something else to kind of keep in mind, is sort of like, okay, when's the next likely catalyst? So when we just announced our target, you then have a long time to wait, because the next thing you're probably waiting for, besides some like weird news about the company, which is bound to happen along the way, which will probably just drive the price down, the next thing that you're waiting for is okay, we're going to vote on whether or not we're going to approve this on X date. Okay, and then you probably get your best run up at that point, or I guess your most confined run up with less likelihood of traumatic dips after the fact. But yeah, the first catalyst of we're announcing that this is who we're merging with, probably as a percentage gain is much higher, but the volatility that then will follow, I think, is often much higher than the volatility that will follow the run up after announcing the vote date and the merger date. All right, so you have this month or so timeline between we set the dates. Okay, we got approved. Did this approval happen on 6/11? Let's double check it on here. 6/11 announces shareholder approval of business combination. All right, so that puppy got approved. And then that was on the 11th. So you have one trading day, just 2 trading days later. PTRA, it changes the ticker symbol from ACTC to PTRA. Is that right? 6/15. Should be 2 trading days later, I believe. Yep, now under PTRA. So ACTC now under PTRA. All right, so that's how quickly it can happen. It's a bit nutty, but that's almost always what happens. Approval, and then bada bang, bada boom. Okay, we're rolling it out in a couple of days. So you do see here it obviously topped out a bunch of times. I mean, I would keep an eye out for all of this, like, just repetitive topping out. Seemed pretty obvious, I think, that like it was having a tremendously hard time getting itself above $20 essentially. Even like over the mid 19s, I guess is reality. And so after a launch, and then people are once again trying to like, how do we price this company? Like, what's the additional info that's come out on the company's like prospects and earnings and growth and products and things like that. But also then comes in the question of like, what's the issue with the lockup period? When's the lockup period end? And those documents, as we've been dealing with IPOE as it transitioned to SoFi, are very, very opaque. They're not very public friendly, I would say. First, you have to go locate them. And then even after the dates are known, it's still not written with the dates clearly defined. It's all about like, oh, after 30 days, if you meet this criteria, then 20 days later, it'll do this. And it's an insane process. But that's for another video. But yeah, after this happens, I think it's just essentially trying to price the actual company of Proterra, but then also factoring in things like lockup period and when are folks selling out or able to sell their shares and things like that. And so it continues to try to like refine its floor, which I think is essentially what it's doing now. So, it's only been about less than a month since the ticker symbol change. And so that's what it's struggling with at the moment. Now, if we back this up, I can sort of explain. So if we look back here at when this catalyst happened, there was this big gap. And so I took from the bottom of that gap, which is this 1409 zone, and then I took the top of the approval hype 2012. It was just a wick up there, but I just want to see how much it had retraced since then, which is what the purpose of this fib is. So it's down retraced about 50%. At one point it did dip to that 61.8, below obviously, but then it has since recovered, bounced off the 38.2, and then came down and is sort of like consolidating right along this 50, which is where it was, about a week or so ago. Anyway, and so this is where I'd continue to look for it to run a consolidation pattern. I mean, comparatively speaking, like it was essentially consolidating up here, but it was consolidating in a way that it was just repetitively topping out. What it's doing down here, it looks to me, is that it's consolidating in a way that it is repetitively bottoming out. And so what I would look for is the extent to which it continues to bounce around the tops and the bottoms of these two areas. As long as it stays between these two blue boxes, in my opinion, it still is just consolidating and trying to figure out like where it's going to go, what it's, where it's going to settle. So I'll extend these out a few days so we can keep an eye on it. But, if we do see it fall below, I'm going to put this as like a cautionary zone. So I'd be careful if it falls below here and it can't hold this, previous floor that it's trying to maintain. And then this topping out zone, also essentially a cautionary zone as well. So keeping between the two yellow boxes, the other way to look at this is when it does start to lift off of here, which like obviously it did at close on Friday. I don't know if there was a particular catalyst for that run up or not, but the extent to which it can get on this like 50% fib retracement zone 1710 and get support there, and sort of stop consolidating or stop bottoming out in the yellow zone, that could be potentially a really good dip buy zone if it is going to run up after that. So if I put just sort of right on top of that a purple dip buy price to look at. Oh, I don't know why it did that. It's not what I wanted it to do. I don't know. It selected the entire fib. I see what happened. I'm just trying to get that one line. I put it too close, I guess. Yeah, so that's what I would look for on that side of things, for the immediate time frame. And then I think that it's like these fib zones actually worked out pretty well for the next price zone up, which would be this 1870 I would look at. And then your next big sort of like challenge is going to be that 1949 to get support over there, because there's so much previous topping out in that area. So obviously a bunch of sell pressure that pops in there. But if you get that, then your next lookup can be that 2012 area in order to build some support there and move on up. But that's what I would be looking for in the foreseeable future. On the indicator side of things, just to round out the video, we're a bit over the mid-range on the RSI, so sort of like continues to consolidate a little bit. It'll stay in this mid-range where it has been, and it's just kind of waiting to pick a direction, in my opinion. This is basically confirmed by the MACD, except for that sort of like sudden, pretty substantial uptick at close on Friday. It was just sort of like consolidating here under the baseline. So the fact that it had this nice bounce off of the signal line from underneath the baseline gives it a ton of run room to the upside if it does want to make a run up at that yellow zone to the top side, like that yellow zone in the 18s, to see if it can get support around that 1860, 1870 area. That's what I would look for to say that it's out from underneath that. But again, the first thing that I look for is, clear support over that 1711 and then that 1782. And then, what is it going to do when it makes a run at that yellow zone in the 18s? But yeah, that's what I see for Proterra. Good luck if you're in this one. Before we close out the video, I will just mention that if you'd like to stay in contact once or twice a week for a newsletter that I'm going to be planning on putting together, I'm putting a Google form link in the description below, and you can throw your email in there. I haven't yet started to conceptualize the newsletter, but I do know that I don't want it to be something that's sent out more than once or twice a week, because I know how annoying those things are. And so it'll be like additional trade ideas, supplemental info to the videos that I've put out that week or in previous weeks, maybe some recaps on some plays that, videos went out for, but just stuff that like I just don't have time to make more videos on, but I could throw into a newsletter and send it out to folks. So if that's interesting, stick your email in there. We're just a few emails, like literally maybe 3 or 4 emails away from getting to 100, which that was sort of the threshold that I was putting for myself for like, once there's 100 people on here, then I'll go ahead and start actually figuring out what this is going to look like and what service I'm going to use and all that jazz. And if you do sign up for it, then before I send out the first one, I'll send an email to folks and say, hey, here's what the newsletter is going to look like. Here's what it's going to be. Here's how often I expect it to be coming, which again will just be once or twice a week. And if you want to opt out, definitely understand, like, here's how you can do that. So give you an opportunity to do that beforehand, of course. But yeah, look for that if that is something that could be interesting to you. Hopefully we'll have some cool content in there. And if you're still hanging on and you're enjoying these videos and you'd like to share them, I would certainly appreciate that. Reddit, Twitter, Facebook, any of those things goes a long way. Anywhere that you share or talk stocks, I would definitely appreciate that as well. All right, well, that will do it for this video. I hope you are having a good one, and I will see you in the next video.